Hello everyone, welcome to Reiki Radio. I am your host Yolanda, and today we are continuing our journey through the major arcana. And today our meditation will be on the Hermit card. But before we get into the Hermit, I just want to say that I am so thankful again for you being here and going through this journey with me. And if you would like to share your insights, you can join us in the Seeker Circle on Facebook. You can get more information on my website, which is yewchi.com. That's YEWCHI.com. And one of the things I want to point out that I did mention the other day is as we go through this journey, each card has information or teachings that prepare us for the following card. And I mentioned yesterday, I believe, that it's interesting. What I've noticed is while I am meditating on whichever card we're focusing on for the day, some aspects of the card that will follow come into play as well. So I want to say the card that we did yesterday was the Strength card, and it was really looking at if it is necessary to be forceful to be in our strength. And what I have learned about that card, not just yesterday, but just through these years of doing this work, is that being outside of our ego or our forcefulness is effortless. So it starts out with being in observation and first of all acknowledging where we do become maybe forceful in our power or our way of expressing our power. And once we start to observe and understand our choice in action and the way that we use our strength, we then do go into a space of using effort to make the decision of how we are going to change our behavior. We also go into a space of using effort to change our perspective, using those tools of the magician. And again, we make an effort to connect with our higher selves, using that beautiful insight from the High Priestess. But as we continue to practice through that line of awareness, we finally get to a space where it all falls away and the effort dissipates. And you recognize using your strength is simply being in your strength, not feeling a need to exert some forcefulness. It's just a state of being. So with all of these cards and all that we're learning, know that it's all a process. And while we are meditating on these different aspects of ourselves each day, they are all teachings that we can put into practice continuously. So, the energy of all the cards that we've gone through so far don't fall away just because we have a different focus of the day. We can really reference these different energies and these different teachings at any given time to support us with whatever comes up throughout our journey. So the Strength card really sets us up for the Hermit, which we are going to explore today. And it is through that awareness of how we identify strength and if we are being gentle with our power. Really having that awareness really sets us up for this next step of turning in even more and accessing our inner wisdom, which is what the Hermit is all about. Because once we've gone through the work of the Strength card of taming the ego, we can then start to look at ourselves more deeply from a space of higher wisdom so that we move out of the judgment, the fear, and all of the things that may come up. And again, access that compassion. So let's get into this card. The Hermit is the number 9, and the number 9 is really like a number in of itself that speaks to our self-mastery. And the 9 is so interesting because any number that you add to 9 will reduce to itself. So, for example, if you add the number 3 to 9, you get the number 12. And then you would take those two digits, the 1 and the 2, and add those together until you get a single digit, which is the number 3. So even though you added 3 to 9, it will reduce back into itself. So no matter what we add to ourselves through this life experience, or we perceive we are adding to ourselves in this life experience, ultimately we are going through the process of reducing back down into the self. The self is never lost in this journey. Then anything that you multiply by 9 is 9. So again, the example, 3 times 9 is 27, 2 plus 7 is 9. So even when you multiply, it reminds me of us being a projection of source, or universal life force energy. When we multiply anything into 9, it maintains its integrity. It remains reflective of itself. And then, this is the final example of why this number is all about self-mastery. All of the cards, all of the numbers that we would precede this 9 card, if we add 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, add all the numbers of all the cards leading up to this, we get the number 36, and 3 plus 6 equals 9. So again, it's all about returning to the self. Returning to the self, and remembering that the true self is never gone. It is never without us. But how do we get to that realization? So this is what the Hermit teaches us today. And what question I would ask you from the very beginning is, what are you learning or discovering in this journey, in this life? What have you learned? What have you discovered? And how does it all redirect you back into understanding you? Now, this doesn't take anything off of the table, sometimes we think about this journey of spirituality and just looking at the aspects of what has happened to us when we started this exploration consciously. So maybe you will look at, once I started Reiki, my perspective began to change. Or once I started meditating, I started to connect with myself more deeply. But even the aspects of your life experience prior to coming into this conscious awareness has also been a part of your spiritual journey. There is no part of your life that has not been a part of your teachings and adding to your wisdom and your understanding. It's just a matter of us being able to reflect on these things and see the lessons and acknowledge what we have learned along the way. So the Hermit card really speaks to the energy of wisdom, but more specifically our inner wisdom. And it can also be about finding a mentor, because as we've talked about, even with the Hierophant, people who teach us or show up as mentors in our lives, they oftentimes help us to remember, or they spark, inspiration in us to cause us to become contemplative, that cause us to redirect and look back in. Just like this podcast, for example, you may listen to Reiki Radio and there may be something in particular that sparks your own question or sparks your own introspection. So, but the key is that it always goes back in. So, the beauty of this is that for all that we're looking for, the Hermit reminds us that we already have it. We're already there. Whatever we think this destination is or where we're trying to get to, we're already there at all times. It's just a matter of recognizing that. So we've looked at the element and the associated planet with each card, and this card is associated with the element of Earth as well as the planet Mercury. And those two combinations speak to the astrological sign Virgo. And with that, we can think of, very specific to the Hermit, what you have gathered, again, through your life experience, and how you make that information useful. How do you make what you have experienced or learned, how does that become purposeful? What has it taught you? What have you come to understand through your life journey? Now, we have explored a lot. This is day 10. We're almost halfway through this process. So with all that we have explored leading up to the Hermit card, this is a good time to start to question how all of this information, how all of these tools are influencing or impacting or inspiring your perspective. With all that you've looked at about yourself this last 10 days, what realizations have you had? What have you learned through your internal wisdom? We learn through our inner wisdom all the time. We just don't necessarily acknowledge it. And it's interesting because as you do this work, and it's like nothing really gets by you, you start to connect the dots, you start to have a deep appreciation for everything because you see how it is supporting you and how you're learning. So, for example, like I told you yesterday with the Strength card, there was a person in my life who I could have looked at as, someone trying to trigger me, or whatever. I could have looked at them as a lot of different things. But in this process and in my awareness, I had a deep sense of gratitude yesterday for what I was learning and what that person triggered, and it being a mirror for me, looking back at myself. So we do this all throughout life. We can look at the richness of all of our experiences and again, bringing it back into what it is teaching us, whether it's uncomfortable, whether we like it or not. Once we move into a space of understanding, it helps us to have a deeper appreciation. Now, one of the things about this card that stands out right away is the simplicity of it. The other cards that we looked at in comparison were busier. There were more elements, there were more symbols. And this one is very simple in its symbolism. There's just the image of a man. His head is down. He's holding a staff, which could also be the wand of the magician. And he's holding a lantern. And he is just on the peak of a mountain. We see nothing else in the background, just darkness, just gray. So this simplicity also speaks to this energy of just being with yourself, outside of distraction. He has this lantern, the staff, and nothing else on top of this mountain. And like I mentioned before, we tamed the beast yesterday, our ego, looking at how we interact with that. And so now we are able to look in without distraction and without fear. Now, the purpose, again, is to acknowledge what you've learned, what you've experienced, but then what, right? It's interesting that we, kind of go through all of these considerations, but this card is where we pause to acknowledge what is here. What if you stopped seeking? We have all these tools, again, Reiki, meditation, tarot, whatever it is. What if you had a day or a time frame where you stopped seeking externally? What if you gave yourself a moment to just pause and acknowledge again what you have gathered, that internal wisdom? What if you allow yourself to just be? What can you learn in your silence? What can you learn without effort? Now, I talked to you about meditation before. This came up where a lot of people have a hard time with meditation because they are trying to meditate, or they're putting in so much effort and then turn around and say that they can't do it because they believe that they're doing it wrong. So again, in this idea of being effortless and just sitting with yourself, drop the word meditation. If you just give yourself time and space to just sit, just be with yourself. Don't try to do anything. Just sit and witness. Notice what you feel in your body. How is your body speaking to you? What is your body communicating to you? Sit and be with your feeling. What emotions, what memories, which of these aspects of you begin to come forward in your silence? And why are they coming forward? What are they teaching you, revealing to you, helping you to understand? When you sit with yourself and observe the mind, is it busy? Is it quiet? Are there particular thoughts that are most prominent? And what are those thoughts revealing to you about you? This card is a reminder that, sometimes we have to just sit and embrace whatever we have experienced to allow ourselves to deepen our understanding. It reminds me of in Reiki, when people first start and we get so excited and we want to go, level 1, level 2, let me do master level, let me learn this, that, and then we jump through modalities without taking a breath, and then we hit a wall and we feel like everything is like crumbling because we didn't leave space to acclimate. We didn't necessarily leave space to process what we have just shifted. We didn't leave space for contemplation. So it is a good reminder again to not just rush through experience, not to just keep piling in information, but give yourself space to sit with it. What are your experiences teaching you? How are you processing the information that you have been given beyond just taking it at face value? Now, what's interesting is there's a lot of consideration about what's ahead, right? And we are constantly thinking about what's to come. How are we progressing? What's next? And it can be scary. This journey in its entirety is really unknown. Do you really know how your life is going to end up? Do you really know what's going to happen tomorrow? And, do you know where you're headed ultimately? Do you know? This is why, presence is so important as well. Like, just be where you're at. Be still. Give yourself these moments of stillness to take it all in. Again, you can access that energy of the strength card that we looked at yesterday. And, in that space of being with yourself, really click into that energy of compassion and being gentle with yourself. Because who knows what will come up. And, we oftentimes have a lot of regret around what we've done or choices we've made or different aspects of our journey. But in that space of gentleness and compassion, we can step out of the judgment and see what our choices, what our decisions taught us. Again, what they may have revealed to us about ourselves. Now, all of the cards before, really were supporting us in seeing and transforming all that we have gathered. And all of the cards before this showed us that we have the ability to manage all that we are creating. But more importantly, all of this is helping you to discover what you are and what you are not. But the only way you can make that discovery is by acknowledging you. So the Hermit card, another thing we can ask ourselves today is what we are walking away from and what we may be walking towards. Because if nothing else, we always have decision. Are we walking away from old beliefs? Are we walking away from old patterns? Are we walking toward ourselves? Are we walking toward our truth? Are we walking away from it? As we start to do this work and really dig in and start to understand ourselves and begin to listen to our inner guidance like the Hermit is asking us to do, we stop seeking really, and we start being present in the journey. Now again, what if you stop seeking just for today? Stop looking for answers outside of you just for today. And what if you give yourself that space to turn in, accessing your own inner wisdom? This is such an interesting journey. It reminds me of two I just want to share with you if you're thinking how do I do this really? One thing I used to do last year, and I don't know, I did it for a while. I used to take a day of silence once a month. And so what I would do once a month is I would turn off the ringer on my phone. I wouldn't use the computer. I wouldn't watch television. I didn't listen to the radio. I removed myself from all outer distraction, but more specifically technology. And I would let people know, like my family and friends, that I'm not answering the phone today. But of course, if you have children and things like that, you may have to check your phone and your messages, but maybe just letting people know you won't be responding to anything unless it's absolutely urgent and necessary. So I would take this day to just be with myself in silence. And the interesting thing that happens is you become hyper aware of everything, internally and externally. In that space of you being silent and without external distraction, you start to pay attention to what you actually see. You start to hear all the sounds, all the ambient noises. You start to hear the birds. You start to really tune into, again, that inner voice, because there's nothing to distract you. So it's an interesting experience, and I always recommend that people do it at least once. And, there are people who go to do this for, weeks at a time. I know a place here where you can go for a 10-day retreat in silence. But it's amazing what you will access, what you will realize, that internal wisdom that is always present within. You know what it reminds me? In this realm, like we always say, the answers are within. And that can sound so annoying if you're someone who is always looking out. But if you give yourself the experience to just be with you for an extended period of time, to be in silence and in observation, you start to understand what that means. It's all about giving ourselves the experience, right? So let's look at this card, and again, it's very simple, but there's depth in symbolism. So one of the things too, I received a few messages of people saying oh, I like the way you interpret the cards, or you've given more layers to it. Part of it is because I have actually studied the cards, but there's also depth in symbolism. So, for example, anything that you see, any card that you could pull out right now, right? Any image in that card will have meaning to you, even if you don't know what it means in connection with the tarot itself. Each image can have meaning to you by asking yourself simply, what is this thing? And what does it mean? Or what does it do? So for example, like we looked at the Strength card yesterday, there is a lion on the card. Well, what is a lion? What do you know about a lion? What does that energy feel like? What does a lion do? So once you start to describe this image, this symbol, you start to give the picture meaning. So as simple as the Hermit card looks, there is some meaning here. So let's look at, he is carrying his own light. And if you really look at that light, there is a 6-pointed star inside. It's not like a flame. It's a 6-pointed star. And for me, when I see a 6-pointed star, I think of as above, so below. The two triangles, one pointing up, one pointing down, also known as the Star of David. But that energy, that illumination of as above, so below, the union of self, the light of the mind. Now, in this, I think of the light of the mind because I told you the associated planet for this card is Mercury. Mercury is about communication. It's the process of thought. So we are illuminating here our own inner wisdom, our mind, our process of thought. We also see this man holding a staff, which again I mentioned could be a symbol, or the wand that we saw with the magician. And the wand we talked about is associated with the element fire. So he's holding this wand. What does fire do? Fire illuminates, but it also transforms. So already we have this man with this energy, with this symbolism of union within the self, inner wisdom, illumination of his own mind, illumination of his own wisdom, and holding the power of transformation. He is able to transform whatever it is he may witness or observe. But more importantly, he's able to see it. He's able to witness himself. Now, the other thing is that he is standing on top of a mountain. And again, there's an energy of solitude in that. But what is a mountain? When we climb something, we reach a new level. We have reached the top. So we can say that this card is speaking to reaching a new level of awareness. Going into ourselves, connecting with our inner wisdom, helps us to reach a new level of understanding. But what is he standing on? What's on top of this mountain? Snow. Okay, what does snow do? It melts. It transforms back to its original form. Snow will turn into water. What are we doing on this journey? Why are we seeking? What are we trying to understand? Our true selves, our true nature, our original form. And how we get back to that? We allow the old stories, the old perceptions to melt, to transform, to fall away. We return to the self by tuning in to the self. So again, it seems really simple looking at the picture, but when we start to examine what we see, there's so much richness in the teaching of this card. Now, he also is looking down. Again, we can look at that as not being distracted. We can look at it as a symbol of looking within. He has a white beard, which is a symbol of wisdom. He's cloaked in gray, and there's darker gray around him. It's night. We don't know what we will see when we go within, but we can again go back to that energy of the strength card to give ourselves the strength, the courage to do so. We can give ourselves the strength and recognize our ability to look within into the unknown. Who knows what will come up when we sit down and just shut up and just see what surfaces for us, what wisdom we hold. You may be surprised to find what you hold. And even the color gray we mentioned before is like a blend of black and white. It's a blend. It's like a space of neutrality where we come out of the duality, come out of the extremes, and just be. Okay, now this card is also about guidance. It's also about finding a mentor. And as I mentioned before, that, just like we learned with the Hierophant, we gain a lot from teachings being passed down to us. But the key is really allowing ourselves to process those teachings, to sit with them, to chew on them, to experience things, to see what the deeper meaning is for us. But another thing with that, and this is more for people who are teaching, who maybe if you are a teacher or a mentor, sometimes we don't always reveal the full picture to whomever we may be teaching or mentoring. And it's not because we're withholding information to be in power, like we discussed with the Hierophant. Sometimes a teacher or a mentor will withhold information to leave room for your own understanding, to leave room for your own experimentation and your own thought. There's a saying, there's a phrase, I don't know who said it, but it was something like a good teacher is someone who tells you where to look, but not what to see. So in this process, you look within, but how could anyone tell you what to see? In Reiki, you get these tools of self-connection and transformation, but no one could truly tell you what your experience is going to be. It's for you to experience. It's for you to see. And that's why we always say, practice your practice. So if you are looking externally for guidance or mentorship, remember that a big part of what you are learning comes back to your process of it all. And, a lot of what we seek externally, if you look at what you have learned and what you have experienced, there is no aspect of your life that hasn't been some form of trying to redirect you back in. Redirect you back in, to hold the mirror, to look at you, to consider you. We seek to remind us, to trigger our thoughts, and to help us remember again to use our own inner wisdom. We seek until we come to a place of stillness, of contemplation and consideration. And once we give ourselves that space to kind of chew on it all, it's quite, common that we'll go back out and seek again. It's a cycle. It's a process. We seek, we sit. We seek, and we sit. But accessing our own internal wisdom along the way is key. So again, I recommend that if you do want to really explore the teaching of this card, maybe consider having a day of silence. And if you can't do that, at least allow yourself to just sit Just create space to sit and be in observation of you. Allow yourself to be in a space of consideration, of contemplation. And just notice what comes up for you. Because again, the answers are within. So, that is all for the Hermit card today. The big question here is, what are you learning or discovering? And recognizing that you have so much information already here. I have to say that, I am recording this a little later today, partially because I had a meeting with these two women who took Reiki training with me earlier in the year, or actually it was last year. They were in the same class as Kesley, the one who was a guest on the show a few months ago. So these two women, they are both retired, and they are so beautiful. I mean, I love them so much. And one of them, she is, if I'm not mistaken, she's either in her 70s or just turned 80, but she's somewhere in there. And we were discussing today, her being in the space of, she used to be a teacher, and now she's in this phase of life where she's no longer working, so to speak. Her children are grown. She's no longer mothering in the same way that she did in the past. And the image that came up was the Hermit. But also what came up for me was the triple moon goddess, and how we all go through these different phases, in different stages in our lives. So we go from, the stage of seeking and wanting to learn, and then we may transition into a space of sharing and teaching, or exchanging ideas and information. But then at some point we move into that space of where we're just observing the wisdom that we've attained along the way. We are just being in our wisdom effortlessly. It's no longer an external push to seek. It's no longer an external push to teach. It's just being in our own wisdom. And while that can be reflected in our entire lifespan, like, from youth to middle age to being an elder, this is also a cycle that we go through, many times in our life. Like right now, you may be in a space of seeking, you may be in a space of teaching, or you may be in a space or allowing yourself to create the space to just be with your wisdom. So that is all for today with the Hermit card. Again, I always would love to hear what comes up for you. You are welcome to come share with me in the Seeker Circle. And you can get information on my website, which is yuchi.com. That's YEWCHI.com. And if you are looking for mentorship or guidance on this journey, I will be opening up my mentoring packages again, coming up pretty soon. So you can, again, get information about that in my newsletter, just to be updated. So I hope that you all have a beautiful day. I will see you tomorrow, and remember to always journey in love.